this year is the fifth year of the Josh Heupel era. And I think just with some of the things that happened back in April, expectations have been altered a little bit. What is the temperature on Josh Heupel's seat right now?
Oh, very, very cool. Not
Okay.
not hot in the slightest. I think things would have to have a very bad year this year for that seat to really be getting particularly warm. He's done an incredible job, I think, of raising the floor for the program, in which is part of the reason I don't think things are truly going to fall apart, in part because of the schedule too. I think sets them up in a decent spot. But no, not hot at all, in my opinion. I think you're still a number of years away from hot seat talk being legitimate about him. If he can't get over the hump, if he can't get Tennessee to, whatever that looks like, an SEC championship, semifinals of the college football playoffs, more tangible proof that, all right, he looks like he's close to getting Tennessee to winning a national championship. Because for all that he's done to raise the ceiling, which is a ton, and he's done a great job, he hasn't really shown too much that makes me feel like that's going to happen. But especially when your program is where it was when he took over at Tennessee, I think that's a conversation you probably don't start having until year 7 or year 8, as long as the floor is high, which like it has been.
Yeah, I think that's helped out a little bit, and you're looking at 23 as a down year at 9-4, which is the ceiling in the last 15 years before Heupel was on the job, which I think you do have to think about that a little bit if you're a Tennessee fan. One thing I didn't ask you about, I probably should have earlier, the major elephant in the room with this Tennessee football team, which is the quarterback position.
Yeah.
And I've already forgotten if I mentioned at the beginning of the show, but I am not in my normal abode right now. I am in a mountain resort near the quaint town of Blowing Rock, North Carolina. You know what is 10 minutes north of Blowing Rock, North Carolina is Boone. And about another 5 minutes in, you get to Kid Brewer Stadium, which is the former home of current Tennessee quarterback. And what's that phrase you use to describe the baseball players?
Former future.
But it applies to him at UCLA, kind of.
Yeah.
It does apply to him a little bit there. But I think everybody's in agreement that he is the most ready for that job out of just the 3 guys that you got in that room. Not that those guys can't prove themselves over the course of this season, but just looking at it from a 30,000-foot view. How much of his tape have you gotten to watch, or have you gotten to see a good bit of his highlights? And is it just one of those things where we think, or we just don't really know what we're going to get from this guy until we see him play, just a high number of snaps against SEC football teams? Is that the case?
I lean towards that. I mean, look, I've scrounge through what you can find, which that's a little bit of the problem with Appalachian State football. It's not like it's a ton of stuff just readily available to watch of him. But yeah, I think you're right. And I think a lot of it's just the aspect of the offense is a lot different that he's going to be running at Tennessee. And so much of what is a big part of his game, which is kind of risk-taking, playing off script, it's not Josh Heupel's offense at all. It's a lot of structure. It is a lot of throwing the ball on time. A little bit of improvising is obviously always going to be in any offense a factor, but it's not a ton of that. So just how does he fit in this offense? The turnover aspect. He turned the ball over a lot at Appalachian State. Josh Heupel's offense really mitigates interceptions for quarterbacks. It makes it harder for them to throw interceptions. How much does that factor over? Because I think that's the most interesting part of this whole situation, because I think you're right. He has more experience. He's the most ready guy. I would be surprised if he's not the guy running out there for the first snap against Syracuse on August 31st. But I kind of look at his game, and I kind of look at Jake Merklinger's game, and I look at how this Tennessee team is built, and I kind of wonder if Jake Merklinger's not a little bit of a better fit. I think he's a little bit more of that game manager guy. He's a little bit more of that, let's limit mistakes. let's take what's there. Let's let our defense and run game win us games. Which doesn't mean, Aguilar can't evolve and do a little bit more of that, but you just don't see a ton of that at App State. So, Tucker, when you say, are we just going to need to see a good bit of it and know what it looks like? I think that's accurate, and I think that specific reason is maybe the biggest.
Yeah, and that's a fascinating point you brought up there about Merklinger, because I feel like just of all the quarterback recruits, transfers, what have you, in the Heupel era, he is kind of the most slept on, just because, doesn't have that 5-star rating, didn't play that much high school football to begin with, just as a lacrosse player. But I mean, you look at his numbers his senior year of high school. What was it, like 38-2 touchdowns, interceptions? It's
Something
a crazy
like
number. And I mean, it's obviously high school and college are different games, but that's reminiscent of what Hendon Hooker did here. Not a lot of turnovers. So that is something that it's not something I've thought of a whole lot, but it's definitely now on my radar now that you said it.
Yeah, I think to your point about him being slept on, I don't know. Maybe this is mean. I don't think anyone really ever expected him to play. Like, he kind of felt a little bit Tavon Jackson-esque, where
I agree with that.
Yeah, you knew Tavon Jackson, you knew it was going to be Hendon, and it was probably going to be Joe for a year, and it was going to be Nico, and it felt like Merklinger comes in after Nico, and you knew it felt like Nico was going to have at least one more year, or 2 years with Merklinger in the program as the starter. George McIntyre was a big top 15 recruit at the time. Obviously, he fell down the rankings a little bit more, and then when Faison Brandon kind of came into frame, it's obviously 2 years removed, but that's another real big name. It just never. It felt like Merklinger was kind of a guy because you have to take a guy. You got to take a quarterback every year for depth. It never felt like he was really going to be thrust into that role. And I think large part because of the ceiling isn't as high as some of those other guys I named, but. And it's hard to draw a ton of parallels from playing what I believe is 2A Georgia football, but it feels like his floor is maybe a bit higher than a lot of those guys. And when you talk about a team that is good defensively, has a good running game, maybe doesn't really have national championship aspirations, it's just kind of trying to steady the ship this year after a lot of unexpected turmoil in the spring, I think Merklinger makes a good bit of sense.
Yeah. I think that's one to monitor, and of course George McIntyre is the one that I think many of us thought would supersede Merklinger, but of course he's only gone through spring ball, and that's all he's been able to do with Tennessee. But that's more than what Joey Aguilar has done, even though he's got more college ball under his belt. Just a couple more things from me, Shump, and then unless Jordan, do you have anything else?
Oh yeah, I was gonna ask. Tennessee lost a lot of receivers and safeties in this offseason. Are you concerned with Boo Carter playing both ways? Are you worried that he might be worn thin?
Yeah, I think that's just a fascinating situation. Like, you don't see it much. We talked about earlier, I guess it was with Tristan Keys, kind of a little bit of need to see it to believe it. I think I'm in a little bit of see it, believe it range with Boo Carter. I'm sure he's going to get snaps offensively. Is he going to get like legit 30 snaps a game, 25 snaps a game? I'm going to have to see that to believe it. So, yes, I think so. But I think you put the emphasis still on what he does defensively because he's, maybe a step further. But, I say that at the same time. I'm just very worried in general about the status of the receiver room. And I was before they lost all the guys in the portal. The room just has not been good the last 2 years, and they've done very little to upgrade it, in my opinion. So, to me, that remains one of the biggest question marks on the roster.
So, again, just a couple more things from me, and then we can let you run, Shump. You've been a terrific guest. You are our first guest on this show, by the way.
Oh, what an honor.
Yeah.
I'm feeling good now.
Normally we have a lot more to discuss, but it is kind of the dead time here in the world of college football. But again, recruiting will pick up at this time of year. Just a couple more predictions, I guess you could say. You mentioned the big three games on the season or on the schedule earlier in the show: Florida, Georgia, Alabama. Those are three games that everybody that associates themselves with Tennessee football circles every year, just because you know that it is going to hold a lot of sway on the results later on down the road. Outside of those three, is there a game? Well, Oklahoma is the one that comes to mind. But aside from those four, we'll call it, is there one that maybe we're not paying enough attention to this far in advance?
Yeah, I think I would say no to your answer of is there one we're not paying enough attention to. I don't think there's one that just stands out. I think you wonder what game pops up, though, and what game is a struggle. Because, look, it's just been every year under Heupel that in 21, whatever team wasn't that great, so you maybe don't count that. But the last 3 years, one, they've dropped that they shouldn't have. So, it's typically been on the road. Mississippi State and Kentucky being the other two road games. Like, neither of those teams look great. Kentucky, certainly Tennessee's had a ton of success there. I would point to Syracuse or Mississippi State as being the ones that I would worry more about. Syracuse, I do think Tennessee's a good bit better. It's just kind of like the Joey Aguilar worst case scenario. He comes in, throws 2 early interceptions. Tennessee falls behind because you gave Syracuse short fields. Do you have an offense that can pull you out of the deficit? I think that's the one of the what I would point to is Syracuse, and then Mississippi State. Obviously, a lot of commonality between Jeff Levy and Josh Heupel. We talked about the Tennessee system running the ball well. Mississippi State ran the ball well against Tennessee last year. Maybe Blake Chafin, has a good second year in the program, and that kind of fits the mold a little bit more. I think of like the South Carolina loss in 22 and the Arkansas loss last year. On the road, a little bit more than Kentucky does. So, no, like on paper, none of those games are just like, oh man, this is really sneaky. Like I think this team's a lot better than people are giving them credit for. But Tennessee's had enough of these hiccups away from home that I do think you have to pay attention to it, and you can't just chalk them all up as wins, even if on paper, you feel like Tennessee's double digits better than all those teams.
Yeah, I'm in agreement on you there. I would think, or in agreement with you there, I should say. Now, Tennessee and Syracuse not really knowing what's going on at quarterback to start that game.
Similar spots.
I think that's an equalizer. So that, if anything, would limit the Joey Aguilar disaster scenario, possibly, unless Steve Angeli goes out there and balls out for the Orange. And then Mississippi State, I just think that's one where it's like it's too early in the season to really justify me thinking that is a trap game for Tennessee. Because if that game is in like November, yes, absolutely, I would say that's one you could worry about. But I don't see it with that one. And then you look at the other two home games, like if you're not motivated to beat Arkansas and then beat Diego Pavia this year, there's honestly something wrong with the Tennessee football program. If that's the case.
Yeah. Well, one, you're 100% right. And I'm going to need to see Tennessee. Like, they've been so good at home under Heupel. I'm going to need to see them lose to someone that they are better than at home before I'm worried about it. I'll flip a question to you guys of the big 3 games, Florida, Alabama, and Georgia. Which one do you guys think is most likely Tennessee wins?
Jordan?
Out of Florida, Alabama, and Georgia?
Yeah.
Call me crazy, but I feel like Alabama.
Okay.
I feel like Alabama. I feel like Florida. I'm not excited about going into Gainesville and having to play them there. I know Florida always plays Tennessee the best that they possibly can. Doesn't matter if they miss a bowl game, they're still going to play Tennessee hard. With Alabama, for some reason, I feel like there's something going on with their psyche a little bit after losing Nick Saban and stuff. I feel like there's just like a little shadow like creeping up in their mind. And I just feel like Tennessee might get it done. I mean, I'm not like super confident in it, but out of those 3 games, I think Tennessee versus Alabama, I think Tennessee has the most likely chance of winning against them just because I feel like they got a little bit of a mental edge on Bama right now.
So I actually was on the Florida Voice of College Football show one odd night, I think in like May or something. And I said on paper, that is probably the toughest game for Tennessee right now this season. I know it's late in the season and usually Tennessee goes down there early in the year, which I think is part of the reason for the struggles because Tennessee just doesn't have things figured out. Florida looks like they have things figured out, and then just it's a collapse in mid-October for the better part of the last decade. But I just think they are a little bit more sure-handed at quarterback right now than the other two are. I do think there is a lot of belief in Ty Simpson, and I know it's going to sound crazy because I do think, you just look back at the last decade, Tennessee's not been competitive with this team at home, remotely competitive. But Georgia, I just think the quarterback, the unknown at the quarterback thing. Again, it's the same thing with Syracuse. I'm going to say it again with Georgia. It's a bit of an equalizer. I don't trust Gunnar Stockton. He made one good throw in that game against Texas. I'm not saying that he's not a good quarterback and that he, won't surprise some people this year, but I looked at him last year. I just wasn't that impressed. And, even in mop-up duty, because this is his fourth year in that program. So it's not as if he just hasn't seen the field. They're not overly impressed with him either.
Yeah, I think Georgia would be my answer if Nico hadn't have left because of the Gunnar Stockton deal. If they win that game, I think it's gonna have to be like the A&M game in 23, where you score a special teams touchdown. You really muck it up because I just don't see Tennessee's offense having enough. Yeah. I'll complete the round table and I'll say Florida because of how late it is in the year and because of how difficult Florida's schedule is. I just think there's, Florida's got 4 losses by then if they're not playing for the college football playoff. The Billy Napier hot seat talk. I just see. Kind of to your point, Tucker, earlier, Tennessee playing Florida early, kind of before they've fallen apart a lot of these years. Things look better for Florida now. I do think, I'd probably say Alabama has a higher ceiling. They have a really high ceiling, and I think it could be a really difficult game. But the schedule is just so hard. I could see things going sideways for them. And if that's the case, I think that's more manageable for Tennessee. But all 3 of those are going to be really tough. And I think on paper, it's kind of difficult to see Tennessee winning any of them.
Yeah, and with the Georgia thing, I think it's not so much a game that Tennessee wins. I definitely don't think Tennessee wins that game, but I just think you could have one of those, shall we call it a good bad football game where it's 20-10. You got multiple interceptions in it. Tennessee, it's not a good kind of competitive, but they are competitive for some reason against Georgia. Just again, because of all of the uncertainty, I feel like, and I think you bring up a really good point too about Florida Schumpert. It's something that Jordan and I have talked about on the show before. How much do you really trust Billy Napier? We saw Jeremy Pruitt fake out an entire fan base in 2019 into thinking, the Georgia State game sucked, but you're at least going to finish 5-3 in SEC play, win a bowl, and then feel good about yourself in 2020. And then we saw how that season ended. Not saying Billy Napier is doing anything illegal, but again, how much do you trust him? It's the same thing with Shane Beamer at South Carolina. They've both got talented quarterbacks, but it just feels like there's a cap on what those guys can do. And, I feel like in years where you haven't been talking a ton about them, they end up, having a nice 8-9 win season.
That's true.
Because, last year, I didn't bet an eye at South Carolina, and they won 9 games. But, that in the years where you are talking about them, after they beat South Carolina in 2022, they're all thinking, okay, maybe they can take the next step in 23, 5-7. So, I do agree with you a little bit on the Florida, the potential for Tennessee to beat Florida. And also, I think I was talking to my parents about this last night, but the last time Tennessee played Florida that late in the swamp was in 2001 when they had to reschedule the game because of 9/11. And that's one of the better Tennessee football moments, I would say, post 1998. Still a good memory, despite what happened the next week. But people still look back on that moment fondly.
Yeah, no doubt. It's gonna be strange. I mean, they played late the COVID year. That game was in Knoxville, but I mean, and obviously the last couple of years. I mean, I say the last couple of years. The last 2 times it's been in Knoxville, it's been in October. But Yeah, it's definitely just a completely different vibe with that game not being the third or fourth weekend in September.
Yeah. All right. So one more thing from me, unless you've got something else, Jordan.
I did have some questions written down here. Let me check them out. So what is one thing did you think Tennessee's going to have to get right this season to be successful?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Man, I think it's probably taking care of for the floor aspect, it's taking care of the football. For Tennessee to just win 8 games, 9 games, they just make everybody earn it. A lot of what they did last year. I think that's a big key. If you're talking about making the college football playoff, I think it's some way, somehow, they got to find some sort of explosiveness in the passing game. Just because I don't think this is going to be a passing offense that's good enough to put a lot of pressure on teams, drive after drive. Can they find a way to make some plays down the field? When Heupel does scheme guys open, can they connect on those plays? I think the offense is going to get back to being like a top 20 offense nationally, which it has not been either the last 2 years. I think that's really what they have to do. And if you're talking about making the college football playoff and winning one of these 3 games that we're talking about and not dropping another one, I think that's probably what has to happen.
So I have one more, and this is a question that you're going to hear people ask about just about every team in college football. What is one player on each side of the ball, Ryan, that Tennessee needs to have a breakout season? Caveat, you cannot say quarterback on offense.
Yeah. Well, I'll stick with, what Jordan was just asking. I'll say Mike Matthews on offense. I really am low on Tennessee's receiver room. If someone's going to step up and be a difference maker, I think he's the most likely. Braylon Staley could maybe be a big play guy. But I think Mike Matthews offensively and defensively, name your pick at the edge spot. They got to have someone step up as an edge rusher to fill the pass rushing that James Pierce left. I think Josh Josephs is probably the most likely guy. He's played the most football there. He's played good last year, even though his pass rush numbers were not good. He was an effective player. But it could be Caleb Herring. It could be Jordan Ross if one of those guys takes a step. They're all going to get opportunities, all going to be on the field. But that to me, that's really the one question there, and probably a little bit of depth in the interior defensive line, are really the one questions I have outside of the Jermon McCoy injury about that unit. And then offensively, there's plenty of questions. I think Lance Hurd taking a Darnell Wright type step would go a really, really long way too. But I'll go with Mike Matthews being the guy on the offensive side that they need to take a big step forward.
Yeah, and I think the thought is that the injury is what derailed his season a little bit in 2024. We will be the judge of that this season. And then, of course, you mentioned the receiver room. I agree with you for the record on Mike Matthews, but the last time Tennessee had a receiver out of South Carolina that was flying under the radar, he won a Biletnikoff award.
He was pretty good, that guy, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was
number
all right.
11.
He was all right. Yeah. Maybe Braylon Staley can do the same, take people off guard.
And win a Biletikoff.
Yeah, they're gonna have to. They're gonna have to find some guys this year at that spot. And they do like some of the young guys too. I stood on the field for the orange and white game, and I was right behind Radarius Jackson when he made that just circus catch in the end zone.
Yeah,
that's one guy, and then Travis Smith Jr. is the other one that I keep hearing could potentially find a way onto the field sparingly, kind of like Mike Matthews did last year. But I would say the Heupel MO is to stick to fewer receivers than some other teams would in the league.
Yeah, I tend to agree. But I'm hesitant for the first year receivers, especially freshmen in Heupel's offense. But if there's anything about that receiver room, there's gonna be opportunities for guys. So we'll see. Maybe one of those young guys takes it and runs with it.